Hi, I'm Katie Crane, and this is the Pilates Lounge.
Welcome to Season 4, my friends, of the Pilates Lounge podcast. This is a space for movement lovers, Pilates educators, and Pilates professionals who want to think a little bit deeper about the work we do. My name's Katie Crane. I've been teaching Pilates for over 20 years, and along the way, I've worn many hats. Studio owner, teacher trainer, mentor, and lifelong student of the work we do. I'm also a surfer, an adventurer, a mum, a busy wife, and someone who believes that movement is by far more than exercise. On this podcast, we talk about Pilates as a practice, not just what we do on the mat or on the equipment, but how Pilates shapes the way we move, teach, lead, and live our lives. We explore anatomy, health, business, culture, and the evolving identity of Pilates in the modern world. This is a place for honest conversations, lived experience, and perspectives that respect both the lineage of Pilates and the people practicing it today. So thank you so much for being here. Let's dive into the episode. Hey Pilates people, Katie Crane here, the Pilates professional. Welcome to another episode. Listen up. This topic today is all about the idea of progressive load and helping you figure out whether or not you are progressively loading in your class. The reason that I came up with this topic is because I'm seeing a lot of this language being used in social media at the moment, and it seems to be being used by a very specific type of Pilates instructor. And so then I got thinking, why is that language being used by them? It's language that hasn't been used a lot in social media, in Pilates that I've seen of anyway. So please let me know if I'm wrong. And it's kind of become a little bit of a buzzword, and it's become a buzzword around a very niche market of the Pilates industry. And that niche market is those Pilates studios or Pilates instructors who are leaning towards really heavy loading in their classes. And with that heavy loading, there's a lot of conversations around progressive load and the importance of it. So then it got me to thinking, well, am I or am I not progressively loading when I'm teaching Pilates? I always just assumed that I was. My background is in fitness. I've been teaching Pilates on the equipment for over 20 years. I've worked on a lot of different equipment and worked with a lot of different bodies. And my understanding has always been that, well, of course, we are progressively loading our clients in our classes, regardless of whether or not they're injured or they're fit, regardless of whether or not they're trying to build strength or reduce pain. Everything that we do in the Pilates setting is progressively loading. That's what I thought. And so I started to kind of rethink. Maybe I haven't been, because all of a sudden this has become a buzzword, and the buzzword is only being used by these studios that are doing super heavy weight, or they're doing Pilates repertoire and adding on dumbbells and stuff like that. You've seen it on social media. Maybe you're doing it. I'm not saying do or don't do it. That's just an observation. So I thought, well, maybe I should have a look at the definition of progressive load, and maybe I haven't been progressive loading. Maybe I've been disservicing my students and my clients, and maybe they're not building strength. It's weird how the internet plays on our mind so much, and how these buzzwords are used, maybe not even on purpose, but they are used to speak to people in a very particular manner. So let's have a look at some definitions. Well, progressive it actually comes from the word progression. Progression is a noun, progressive is an adjective, right? So is like an explanatory word. So the meaning of progression is a sequence of numbers in which each term is related to its predecessor by a uniform law. the action or process of progressing or advancing, a continuous and connected series or a sequence. Well, that all just sounds like Pilates, right? Here's some examples of progression in a sentence. The natural progression of his musical talent. Well, aren't we all looking for progression in our clients? So it's fair to say that if you are teaching Pilates, then you are teaching progressively. You're helping your people advance. You're helping them move towards their goals. You're helping them build sequences. This is progression. Okay, so let's look at the term load or the word load. A mass of weight supported by something. The forces to which a structure is subjected due to superposed weight or to wind pressure on the vertical surfaces. Something that weighs down. A large quantity. Lot, usually used in plural, like as in that's a lot. External resistance overcome by a machine or prime mover. Power output or power consumption. The amount of work that a person carries or is expected to carry. The demand on the operating resource of a system. So there's many different ways that you could use the word load, right? To put load in or on, often used with up, as in load up. To place or be a material weight or physical stress on something, as in the grapes loaded down the vines. Load. To increase the weight of something by adding something heavier. To weight or shape, to fall unfairly. So there's all these different ways that we use the word load. So with those definitions, isn't it fair to say that we are all loading up, we are all adding weight, and you can load up without using equipment? For example, if you were doing a bridge, is it not fair to say that the first bridge that you do is generally easier than the 10th bridge that you do because you're progressively loading by adding on the number of bridges that you're doing in that series? That is load. That is adding load. So progressive load would mean that you are continuing to add load on to make something harder. Well, isn't that Pilates? Isn't that pretty much most movement activities? I just find it fascinating that it has become such a buzzword, but the buzzword is being used specifically for people who are doing this, what has, I guess, been coined as athletic reformer or dynamic Pilates. Well, first of all, Pilates can always be athletic. It just depends on the people that you're serving. And all Pilates is dynamic. Pilates does demand dynamic movement, dynamic stabilization, and it's pretty dynamic repertoire if for the brain, for the body, for the mind, for the soul. It really is. So then I started thinking, well, is progressive load the point of what we're doing or not? And when is progressive load missing the point of what Pilates, how people really benefit from Pilates? And when is progressive load really helping people get to where they need? And you may or may not know that the original Pilates equipment, so in particular the reformer, the original springs were very heavy. So I did a little bit of research, and apparently the original style springs, they like each spring, because when you push out the spring, then that on its own is progressively loading, right? You're on the reformer, say you're doing your footwork. Every time you push the reformer out, the springs are opening, but they're also getting heavier the further you push them out. So the load that you end up on depends on a few different factors. How the placement of the foot bar, the height of the person, the length of the carriage, the length of the reformer, the tempo even of which the reformer or the carriage is moving, whether or not the person is fully straightening their legs or using their full range of movement or reducing their range of movement, and of course, how many springs are on. But the original springs were very heavy, and you can still get equipment that is very similar to that original spring tension. I've used Gratz reformers before, and they are much heavier than the reformers that I've got in my studio, and they tend to be recognized as the original spring tension. So of those springs, all of the springs, so there was 4 springs and they were all the same tension, and each of them weighed anywhere between 11 to 16 kilograms depending on all of the above. So how far out you were pushing, how long you are, how long the carriage is, all that sort of stuff. So that's quite heavy. Whereas, of course, these days the springs are based on colors, and it would be really handy if all springs universally were the same tension of the same color. So no matter what studio you went to around in the world, the red springs were the same, the green springs were the same, and so on. Unfortunately, that's not true. You can walk into 10 different studios and the spring colors are completely different. B, where the springs are on the equipment, in particular the reformer, but quite often even the setup of the Wonder Chair, where the hooks go, where the springs hook onto, on the towers, on the springboards, on the Cadillac. There's so many different factors that change the spring settings, and quite often it's where the springs attach, it's the exact length of the springs as well, and of course, it's the exact weight. So there's so many different spring settings these days that it's hard to really say, well, this is a universal tension because there is none anymore. But regardless, universally, we are all progressively loading in every single exercise that we're teaching, in every single piece of apparatus that you're teaching. And even if you're not on a piece of apparatus, it is still progressively loading. So, why has this become such a buzzword? I thought that I'd get a little bit more into that by understanding the importance of progressive load and kind of breaking down maybe why it's being talked about right now. Now, in case you've been living under a rock, you may or may not have realized that there's been a real focus on women's health in the last couple of years, I suppose. It's fantastic. Women are finally getting the spotlight. What happens over the years is things become very popular, and people jump on. I guess I want to say bandwagon. People jump on the bandwagon of popularity because, probably for many reasons, it's easy to find information on things when things are popular. It's easy to market things that are popular if you're a studio. It's easy to feel like you are keeping up with everybody when you're doing things that are popular. And I'm not saying that this popularity of this particular topic isn't important. It's absolutely imperative that we lean into this, partly because I dare say that for most of us, a large part of the people that we serve are women. Now, the popularity around women's health, in particular right now, has really been leaning into perimenopause and menopause. It's gone from staying young. So for quite a while, there was this whole, do everything that you can to look younger. It was Botox and fillers, fake eyelashes, luba lips, all of those things that people were doing superficially to make themselves look younger. Well, thank goodness we're we're getting past that phase of popularity, and now people are looking to live better, to have longevity, but have longevity and actually be healthier. And so there's much more demand on understanding what it is that women need as they're aging to stay healthier, stay stronger. And there's now a lot of information out there that is actually starting to explain what we've been seeing for a long, long time as women's bodies change over the decades. So here's some stats for you that might help you if you haven't cottoned on to any of this. Now, as women, our bodies change immensely over the course of our lifetime, much more so than men. And it's part of the reason that we have not had a lot of information on women is simply because women have not been put in medical studies because there's so many factors in women that have to be accounted for. And when you're putting a study together, a scientific study to say learn about about health, things all have to be the same. But if you think of a woman, different times of the month, we weigh differently. The way that our body works is very different. Our sleep habits are very different. Our eating habits are very different, all because of the hormonal shifts in our body. So, and not just that. So, say you take one woman or 10 women who might have similar hormonal shifts or similar menstrual cycles, then you've got to account, are they on HRT? Are they on contraceptive pills? What supplements are they taking? What are their stress levels? There's so many different variables in women that change the way that our body responds that it's very difficult to get very concise studies because we're also unique. So that's part of the reason that we haven't seen a lot of information on women is it's just hard to gather data on us. But these are some things that we know about women based on what happens as far as hormones declining. So women lose 3 to 8% of muscle mass per decade after the age of 30. Basically, what happens around about when you're 24 to 26 years old, your hormones are going to peak. So, if you're thinking of having a child, evolutionarily, 24 to 26 years old, you're at your peak, at your prime state of health to be bearing children. Well, that ain't happening. We all know that. Many women are either choosing not to have children or they're having children later on in life. 35 to 40 is a very common time for women to be having children, which is also why we have a very poor birth rate because our bodies actually are not primed during those years to be having children. We're primed when they're 24 to 30, 22 to 24, sorry, 24 to 26, sorry. And then by the time we hit 30, lo and behold, our hormone levels start to decline. In particular, estrogen is declining. And estrogen is responsible for joint health. It helps with muscle and bone health as well. And when you don't have that estrogen producing, then you are already in a decline. So 30 years of age, it's a slippery slope from there, I'm sorry to say, but happens to all of us. And it's something that you better learn to live amongst because it's happening to you as well. So if that's a 3 to 8% muscle decline, and muscle mass is related to bone mass as well. So everything is declining from the age of 30, which causes like a yearly loss of approximately 0.6%. So that's about 1% every year, well, up to 1% every year if you keep doing exactly what you're doing. So there are ways around this. You need to actually start to do more. Once you go through perimenopause and menopause, we need to be doing more activities, not less. Hey friend, thanks so much for listening. Did you know that you can now find us on YouTube at youtube.com/The Pilates Professional? Now, if this episode resonates with you, please share it with someone else who would benefit from hearing it. Back to the show. So, resistance training, of course, is one of those things that can increase bone density, actually by up to 41% in the hips. It can reverse metabolic decline. It can reduce diabetes risk by 34% and cut hot flashes in half in women who are going through their perimenopausal years. Now, postmenopausal women with reduced skeletal muscle mass exhibit a 2.1-fold higher risk of falls and a 2.7-fold higher risk of fractures compared with those who have maintained muscle mass. So, your muscle or our women's muscle mass is declining from the age of 30. So, to maintain muscle mass, you're going to have to do more than what you've ever done when you're in your 20s and for the rest of your life. Numbers like this are perfect when it comes to promoting heavy load. But we don't have to be doing heavy load. What we need is progressive load, which is being on the Pilates equipment, but you also need consistency, right? The deal is this whole progressive overload idea is being marketed as the missing piece, and it creates urgency and guilt. Now, many women spend months or even years doing the same workouts, using the same weights, and wondering why their bodies aren't changing. Missing piece is often progressive overload. There's no doubt about it. But the idea that you've been doing it the wrong way framing is proving a conversion hook. It's not dishonest. It's a marketing pattern. And it's part of why the term now carries so much weight, pun intended, in the comment sections and DMs of social media right now. The reality of it is we're living in an aging society. People are looking to ways to live better for longer. And the term that is coined progressive overload is doing a great job at getting people into studios. But this is the deal. We as Pilates professionals need to remember what the point of Pilates is. Now, I'm not saying do not progressively overload. So I'm not saying don't add weight on. Of course, when somebody's coming, as you get stronger, you need to be going heavier. So either you're doing more reps, you're adding spring tension, you're adding variations, you're adding progressions onto the repertoire that you are teaching your client in the class. But we must never progressively load for the sake of progressively loading. And what I mean by that is a big part of the magic of Pilates is things like joint health, better alignment, improved posture, better proprioception, dynamic or reflexive stability, breath, of course. And what happens when people load up too quickly, too much too quickly is they lose a lot of those things. Like I do heavy load at the gym. And part of this conversation is about I'm having a tough time understanding why people think that you need to be doing a 50-kilogram deadlift while you're on a Pilates reformer. Who is that actually benefiting? Because I don't know about you, but I go to the gym, and when I'm at the gym, in my leg work, I'm pressing 100 kilos on my leg press machine at the gym. In Pilates, I'm not doing that heavy because I realize that Pilates very much keeps my flexibility. It keeps the rebound of my fascia, of my muscles, of my connective tissue in general. Whereas at the gym, if I only do heavy loading stuff, then I end up very wound up, very tight. For example, if I'm doing my heavy lifting in my arms, and if I don't do Pilates, then I feel like I would get to the point, and I've seen it time and time again in the studio, I've seen bodybuilders come into the studio, their neck is so tight, their pecs are so tight. I worked with a guy once and he wanted to come to some mat classes in the studio, and he had the most beautiful physique. I mean, you could like pick out every single muscle in his body. He had so much muscle. You could actually draw his body on the wall and you would know exactly where his bicep was, where his triceps were, where his deltoids, the whole bit. It was gorgeous to look at. But when he laid down on the ground and we were practicing something as simple as spine twist, like laying down, he put his arms, like everybody else had their arms on the floor out to a T, but his biceps were so tight and his pecs were so tight that he couldn't even place his arms out on the ground at a T. It was like he was laying on the ground and hugging a big beach ball. That's as far out as he could place his arms. And it was just wild to me how dysfunctional that was. Like, if you cannot lay your arms on the ground when you lay supine, how are you ever going to rotate well? How are you ever going to reach for something that is a long way from you? Like, it just didn't make sense to me. But for him, that was functional because he was doing, what's it called? You know, when you're up on stage and looking beautiful. I can't think of the name. Sorry, I just had a brain sneeze. But so for him, what his physique looked like on stage was more important than him being able to put his arms on the ground when he was laying down. But he was coming to Pilates because his neck was so tight and his pecs were so tight that he could not even lay in bed at night and comfortably put his head on a pillow. Like, he had to have 3 pillows under his head because his head was so pushed forwards from the mass of muscle around his body. Now, this is an extreme case, right? But my point is that the heavy loading stuff is not Pilates. And Pilates is not designed to build that type of muscle. Pilates is designed to improve your capacity to be mobile so that you can function better. So, my argument against the buzzword of progressive overload is denying the very principles of what Pilates offers. And I think that we've got to be very, very careful around how we market things to our clients. The reality of it is, a lot of people come to Pilates because they've hurt themselves in the gym. Why have they hurt themselves in the gym? Well, from what I see, and I go to the gym as well, I'm always observing people at the gym. So it's okay to do Pilates and do the gym. You don't need to do them both at the same time because they actually discount each other, right? So if you're exercising every day, which everybody should be doing, it's okay to be changing up your exercise and not doing the same thing every day. So personally, I'm a fan of doing Pilates 2 or 3 times a week. In addition to, on the other days, heavy lifting, cycling, walking, swimming, just gardening, getting out in nature, just living life, not sitting on the couch. If we all did that, then everybody would be exactly the strength, the flexibility, the mobility, and the stability, the balance, the coordination that they need is just by living a well-rounded life. I think partly this whole progressive overload idea in the Pilates studio has been born from studios trying to sell things like unlimited classes. Oh, you need to come to us every single day and we're going to charge you peanuts for it. And then, so we're going to offer you everything that you need in one class. You're going to be on a reformer. You're going to be doing things so heavy and so fast. And we're going to add on these 10-kilo dumbbells on either side of you so that you can make sure that you're getting your maximum capacity every time that you come. Oh, wow. It's really weird. When I went to Pilates, this is what will happen. When I went to Pilates, I got a sore back. When I went to Pilates, I strained my hamstring. When I went to Pilates, I ended up with my shoulders felt really tight and I could not get comfortable. Well, Pilates A was designed as a rehabilitation tool. I'm not saying that everybody has to be doing clinical Pilates, but even if you're going to a reformer class, it should be cross training to other stuff that you are doing or being used like to make sure that your body is functioning well. Go to the gym and do your heavy load or add on some classes where heavy load is what the class is, but don't call it Pilates because it's never what Pilates was intended and it's not where people are benefiting. So, the whole hamstring thing, there was a study done in Australia. I forget what the footy club was, but if you know what the footy club was, remind me. It may have been Essendon. I don't follow AFL, but whoever the footy club was, and this is a while ago now, it was like early 2000s that the study was done. And this football club, they incorporated Pilates for the first time ever into their season. And it was the one and only season that they did not have any hamstring strains or hamstring injuries. That was just from adding on Pilates. So the importance of not overloading in a Pilates class could be the difference between your clients not getting hamstring injuries, but also being able to recover from potential injuries that they're getting from playing sport and from doing heavy load in the gym. And why do people injure themselves in the gym? Sorry, I'll come back to that. Sorry, I know that I went off on a little bit of a tangent. From my experience, over 20 years of teaching Pilates and seeing many, many people come to us because they've injured themselves in the gym, and that's not saying anything bad about the gym. I go to the gym, is that they are progressively overloading, but they are not cross-training. So Pilates cross-trains the stabilizers, the dynamic stabilizers, but also the mobilizers. So our body should be able to reflexively stabilize when we are doing something. But if all you're doing is adding on heavy load from the get-go, then that's really increasing the structure and increasing the strength of of your big muscle group. So think quads, hamstrings, glute max, biceps, triceps, deltoids, lats, QL, all of those big muscles. But your deep stabilizers, multifidi, which is through your spine, transverse abdominals, even pelvic floor. I see women come to the studio. They've been doing their deadlifts with their heavy load. Oh, look, I can lift 120 kilos over my head. But every time I do that, I wet myself. Is that wild or what? That's not function. I've seen many men and women come to the studio. They've been doing their leg press on the gym and they blow out their spine. It's not necessarily that their body is not capable of doing the leg press, it's that they never took time to integrate any reflexive stability work. This is where Pilates plays a role. You cannot be learning that against heavy load. That's why when people do heavy load and they haven't been doing things like Pilates as an adjunct separately to their heavy load, they end up injuring themselves. So, are we really serving our community if we're doing progressively loaded exercises within the Pilates atmosphere? Or are we missing the point of what Pilates is? This is obviously just what I see and my point of view. I'm not saying that I'm completely right, but I would love for you to argue the point with me. And I would love for you to explain to me why it is that people, if they're able to lift 150 kilos overhead, no problem, they've been doing that forever. And then all of a sudden they end up with a blown out disc. I want you to explain to me what has been going wrong? I don't know if you can even say that it's technique because I've worked with like professional bodybuilders, professional sports people who have had these issues. It's not just average Joe, whereas this is happening. They have good technique. They have high class trainers. Why is it that the footy team who had never done Pilates before, they've been doing heavy load. They do very, very heavy load at the gym as part of their training, and they do a lot of athletic work as part of their training. But it wasn't until they added on Pilates-based training that they now were no longer getting these hamstring injuries. Pilates has its role on its own as an individually tailored class, experience, system, sequence of exercises that is going to help people without having to add on your 5 kilo, 10 kilo dumbbells into that class. I'm just saying, this is just what I see. Anyway, so I just thought that was an important but also interesting conversation because there are these buzzwords. Obviously, progressive load is what we do in Pilates, but we don't need to be overloading people if they are not getting the Pilates principles right. So those principles are good joint placement, better alignment, stability, and mobility. So, for example, if you do a million squats at the gym and you're just doing a heavy load, I can guarantee you're going to come to Pilates with poor hip mobility. So, we're trying to improve things like hip mobility, shoulder mobility. They're both meant to be mobile joints, spinal stability. This is the magic of Pilates. Love being with you guys. Thanks so much for joining me. My name's Katie Crane. I am the Pilates professional. I'll always be here pushing the envelope a little bit, talking about concepts and words and language that is out there in the Pilates universe right now and questioning everything. If you like this topic and you think that somebody might benefit from it, please share it with them so that we can all continue these open conversations together and keep learning together. Sing out if there's any topic in particular that you'd like me to cover on the Pilates Lounge podcast. I love talking everything movement, health, out of the box type of things. And if you're looking for a way that you can continue your own learning, you can check out my wait list for one of two programs that I run. Thrive is for you if you are running your own business and you're looking for ways to increase revenue, increase following, decrease probably how much you're working and get all the help that you need. My Thrive program has taken me to $1 million studio. That's right. At the moment, I'm sitting on $1 million studio and I'm not even have to do all the teaching. I've figured out ways to get business to work for me so that I can be right here with you. So if you need help with your business, connect with me and ask me about the Thrive program. If you need help with your teaching, you're at a time in your teaching career, maybe you've been teaching for probably 2 to 5 years or even in your first year of teaching, you want to join my Refine Teacher program. It's going to get you to understand things like connective tissue issues, fascia, good joint placement, proprioception, the push and pull of movement, that dynamic stability and reflexive stability, actually how the brain understands the work that we do and how you can better teach your client so that they actually can start to do things like progressive loading without disrupting all of the magical concepts that we teach in Pilates. So that is my Refined Teacher Training Program. Reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. Can't wait to see you guys next week. I'll be here. Katie Crane, the Pilates professional. Thanks for coming. And that's a wrap, my friend. Now, before you go, make sure you check out the show notes. That's exactly where you'll find anything we're offering alongside this very episode and the link to subscribe to the Pilates Muse newsletter. Our subscribers receive free handouts and resources connected to the topics we explore right here. They're specifically created for Pilates professionals, movement educators, and Pilates lovers just like you. So, until the next episode,